welcome and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on driving digital transformation in biotech. I am Amanda Daly, Senior Brand Strategist with Escastle Integration, and I will be guiding today's discussion. I first wanted to thank MassBio for hosting us today. For those of you that aren't familiar with Escastle, we specialize in digital transformation services, cloud solutions, and cybersecurity. We've been supporting businesses with their technology and infrastructure for 25 years and are now partnering with over 800 clients with our recent acquisition of AlphaServe Technologies and Northout. We're excited to be expanding our reach in the US, Europe, and Asia to deliver our clients more offerings, talent, and overall value. So for today's speakers, joining us today, we have Rich Eatree, Senior Vice President of Professional Services at Escastle Integration. Rich has over 22 years of IT executive experience, spending his entire career managing IT within the financial service industry. Prior to joining Escastle, Rich was managing director and chief technology officer at PJT Partners, a boutique investment bank. Over the years, Rich has developed and managed innovative, business-aligned platforms that drive revenue and operational efficiencies. Rich holds a position on several advisory boards and volunteers his time to help nonprofits leverage technology. We also have Gary Sheehan, CEO of Spiro Health. Prior to the creation of Spiro Health, under his leadership at Cape Medical Supply, the company grew from a small local provider to a regional leader in specialized HME service delivery. In addition to Gary's role at Cape Medical, he serves in the following capacities: Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod, Board of Directors, Brightree Executive Advisory Board, American Associate for Home Care, and a Vice Chairman. Thank you for joining us and sharing your expertise today, Rich and Gary.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Amanda.
So during today's webinar, we're going to be covering a few of these here. What can digitalization do for biotech companies and what are the benefits? How has the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated digital innovation in the biotech industry? The vendor selection process and third-party risk mitigation. What does the future look like? And can we expect to see an increased digital transformation? So we have a lot of great topics to discuss today. Before we get started, just going to run through quick logistics here. We expect this presentation to run approximately 50 minutes with time for questions at the end. We are going to be recording this presentation and we will definitely circulate it tomorrow for you guys. And please feel free to use the Q&A feature here to ask any questions, and we will do our best to answer them during the webinar. If not, we will follow up with you afterwards. And as always, follow along with us on Twitter using the hashtag driving digital transformation. So without further ado, let's begin. So digital transformation is no longer a buzzword. It's a strategic imperative. So to get us started and really set the stage here, Rich, can you walk us through the complex question of what is digital transformation and what does it mean?
Thanks, Amanda. Well, look, I think to start, digital transformation means different things to different organizations, right? You're never going to find a kind of common definition for digital transformation. However, right, there are kind of several key elements, I think, to it, right? And I think the first is, digital transformation could also be viewed as business transformation, right? And, I think this first bullet talks very well to that, right? Which is really about kind of leveraging technology, right, to drive the business forward in a more kind of innovative, right, and modern way, right? So it's really blending kind of the goals of the business with technology to enable that business to grow and move forward. It's capitalizing on data, which I think we'll talk a lot about today as well, because data is really what everyone says is the new oil. So we'll spend a bit of time, I think, talking about that. And then modernization of IT applications, right? So really kind of looking at applications that you might have in-house that you've been using for the last like 3 to 5 years, and really saying, can they be refactored to run more effectively, more efficiently? Can they run in the public cloud and become more cloud native? Can I rebuild them so that they can become maybe microservices and we could share some of this great functionality that's embedded in this application across other areas of the business? right? And they're really just looking at things almost from a greenfield approach, right? And looking at new applications and new business processes, right, that could really drive and transform your business. And I think like these last two are really kind of a trend that I see in the industry. I see a lot of people really looking at, processes through a kind of a fresh lens and trying to kind of imagine what their organization could look like, as they become more digital.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Rich. And to kind of dive a little bit more into today's conversation, Gary, can you walk us through some of the pain points that biotech companies are facing today in the digital world?
Yeah, I think, we're fortunate to have some very good partners that are developed. We don't develop software. It's not our strength. It's not where we play, but we have partners who do a great job of it. And the challenge that we've run into is primarily around adoption. So we've introduced a number of different tools for our patients to order, reorder, communicate with us through new channels, frankly, that feel quite a bit easier, more sophisticated, more efficient than the traditional phone fax pathway that dominates within healthcare. But the challenge is really driving adoption. How do you sell the patient, referral partner, payer to interface with you using these new tools, and that's become a real challenge around just sort of behavior change and introducing new methodologies and helping them understand why they should use them versus the way that some of them have been interfacing with you a certain way and the same way for 20 years. So that, I think, is the number one issue that we face. Hence if you build it, they will come sort of field of dreams quote there, that it takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, and a lot of energy to implement the right tools. And it takes just as much work, effort, and energy to drive adoption of those same tools. So, we're continuing to explore ways and opportunities to drive implementation, to drive enrollment in some of these new solutions. And it takes an enterprise-wide focus to get there, right? Anytime you're interfacing with that patient, whether it's customer service touch point, a clinical touch point, a billing touch point, we need to be selling these new and different models of interfacing and working with us to get those numbers where we think they should be, could be.
Great. Thanks for that, Gary. So we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has really caused a lot of companies to pivot overnight. And now, a little over a year later, can you walk us through digital transformation in the industry and how it has kind of, how the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated digital innovation?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe we can jump back to the previous slide, because I think there's a couple points there that we were going to touch on that we just didn't quite get to, right? So then there's these sort of, and this is where I get excited, right, is around the front-facing tools, right, that our patients and referral partners should be using. Then you get into this third bullet point around internally, right, the internal team members. How do we automate more of the functions that dominate their day-to-day, hour-to-hour life, such that they're not just pressing keys on a keyboard all day long and in and out of different insurance portals, and doing the hard work that it takes to not just deliver clinical care, but ultimately get paid for it. So we're looking at a number of different robotic process automation opportunities, whereby we can sort of extend the workday hours overnight and through the weekends, in anywhere in the organization where there's sort of a spreadsheet or a list, and you have like functions that need to be performed on, say, 250 different patient accounts. Historically, maybe that list would be broken out across a group or team internally, and divide and conquer. Each of them go in, to 50 different patient accounts and perform whatever that activity needed to be. We're now finding opportunities to, automate those, handle that through scripting and RPA. So that's been exciting. People are working more at the top of their certification, if you will, the work becomes more fulfilling, and it's more directly correlated to patient care and, customer success versus just pounding keys on a keyboard, if you will. And then again, the simplification of communication and automating some of the communication around. We deal a lot with receiving an order for a product or service, and then, as I said, going through this process of written, getting prior authorization and exchanging information with a physician, and each of those triggers some change to the order, an update to a WIP state or status. If we could in a more automated fashion, sort of push alerts out to patients so they understand what's happening, we would really move away from a lot of unnecessary communication that happens today. 2 days after an order sent over, hey, what's going on with my order? Versus I'm getting text messages that are telling me the order's been submitted to authorization. Your insurance partner, XYZ, whomever that might be, typically takes 72 hours to return that authorization. We'll be in touch. So you can better manage the whole customer expectations and keep them more closely informed with what's happening with the product or service that they're pending. So that's it on that one. And then in terms of the next slide, just what's been accelerated and pulled forward. I mean, look, we made the decision March 11th of 2020 to put our entire workforce remote and discontinue in-person patient setups effective that Friday the 13th, because of course there had to be a Friday the 13th on the front end of this thing. And quickly sort of adopted an entirely new way of working and of servicing our patients and referral partners. And nothing really slowed down. We didn't do less work, we just did it differently. And through that, I think learned a lot about the capabilities that we have as an organization and frankly as an industry, and move to a model that was really, we've never called it telehealth, but we've always sort of had a significant telehealth component. Our largest line of business is sleep therapy. So we're providing devices and clinical interactions for patients with a number of different conditions, but principally obstructive sleep apnea. And, the typical pre-pandemic pathway is we would receive a referral that would have sort of some notes, a prescription, and a sleep study that would tell us whether or not, per the insurance guidelines, does this person qualify? We would then go through a qualification and scheduling process, and the patient would come in and see us. And seeing somebody for sleep therapy setup involves sitting in a relatively small space and fitting them for a mask. So you can imagine for about 45 minutes, like the sort of a number of different things that you should not do during a respiratory pandemic. So we really had to adopt a remote first strategy, and it worked really well. And we wrapped a lot of video and digital support around that. I think our patients were very pleased. We did see, there's trade-offs. We did see more patients requiring refits of masks, right? Because you lose something when you're not there, and the therapist can't really study the nuance of their facial structure and put their hands on them and fit them. So there are issues, and there's technology coming out there. There's 2D, 3D fitters that are being introduced to the market to do some more, scientific approach to fitting. The remote continues to be an option that patients are aggressively accepting and have found is a very natural way to start therapy. I can avoid going somewhere and do this from the comfort of my own home. I think a lot of that is going to stay, and there's going to be some new technology wrapped around the entirety of that process to allow for greater success. But yeah, I mean, those are some of the things. And then look, I think the other thing is just forgetting about patient care. I mean, we've had our team members largely 80+% working remote still today even. What does that mean for where we can hire? I'm not one who thinks that is going to endure at that level over the long term, but I do think it's taught us things about how we can amplify our workforce, how we can chase talent in markets where we don't physically operate. If they know how to use our EMR and they're a strong service provider, I don't much care if they're in Arkansas versus, Massachusetts, right? Because we've learned a lot about remote work and how effective it can be. So those are the sort of, I think, the high level things that we've learned in a really forced fashion from the changes that resulted from the pandemic.
Thanks for that. Rich, can you give a few insights on what digitalization can do for biotech companies and what, I guess we'll get into it more, but what are some of the benefits of using digital transformation?
Sure. I think, look, Gary touched on a lot of them, right? I think that, when you look at things in kind of two buckets, right? Processes and experiences, right? I think the one thing we learned, especially through, the pandemic, is that like manual processes just aren't sustainable, right? That, at the end of the day, right, you need to be running things, 24/7, 365. To the degree you could avoid human intervention, the better, right? And I think, it frees people up to do what, they value the most in their jobs, right? I think, as Gary said, and it really kind of creates a better overall customer experience. And genuinely, like, I think people enjoy their roles better when they're not, punching things and reviewing in, spreadsheets. The other piece is experiences, right? So what can you do to leverage kind of modern innovative technology to improve the overall, customer kind of patient client experience? And I think there's a lot of tools out there now that have become very kind of pervasive, easy to integrate across the platform, that allow for a better user experience. You don't always have to physically be somewhere to be able to, as Gary was saying, to get fitted or to have, a telehealth visit with, a doctor now. Like, so the tools that are available to enhance the experience are, there's a lot, right? And I think people really need to look at, when kind of going along this journey, try and understand like what processes, right, are really, creating bottlenecks in the organization. What is it going to take to kind of automate those, right? And the value they're going to get out of that, right? Both financial and human. And then a second, from an experience perspective, like what could have the most impact, for your patients, for your clients, and then really drive innovation through those, right? And that goes back to that kind of business alignment, right? And really kind of understanding, the organization and where this technology can be beneficial.
Great. So now let's just get into digital services as a whole. Rich, do you want to talk us through the differences between digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation?
We got a lot of digitals up there. I think that like this is one that is quite confusing, I think, to a lot of people. I even have to kind of check myself every now and then as we're having conversations with clients. But I think I'll start with digitization, right? It really is about kind of looking at a particular process, right, in its kind of isolation, and what can be done to make that particular process like better, right? And oftentimes, like, digitization and its kind of, in several components of it really kind of drive like an overall like digital transformation. So think about it as, having a process that, might process one piece of kind of information down to a database that then drives kind of something else. It's really just kind of one isolated process and the automation of that process, right? Digitalization, right, is really kind of the process of bringing together multiple pieces of those components to really drive a more extended process and a more kind of holistic, improvement across the platform, if that makes sense, right? And then look, digital transformation, we talked a lot about, I think in the beginning of the slide. But really, you want to kind of bring together and find these kind of processes and we'll talk about the process around how to like really begin the digital transformation journey. But taking those kind of small digitizations and being able to build upon each of them is really what's going to get you successful, right, along your kind of digital transformation journey. Right? It's really being able to identify the small pieces and be able to automate those and then build upon each one of those.
Great. Now let's get into the 3 pillars here. So first, we will start off with CIO advisory. Rich, if you want to just bring us
Sure.
through what this is, and then we can go through the other 2.
Sure. I think when we, engage with, clients and really want to look at, kind of helping them kind of, transform their business, we really start at that point with the business, right? I think that oftentimes as technologists, we can get caught up in the technology, right, and the solution, and forget that we're doing it, right, to help drive our business, right, to help improve a customer, a patient experience, to help drive, operational efficiency, reduce risk, like all of those things, right? So starting at the top level with like, what are the goals of the organization? Like, what are we trying to achieve in the next year, 3 years, 5 years? Right. And how do we kind of underpin the right technology to be able to drive that, forward? I like to say that, digital transformation always starts with the right foundation. Right. And I think you need to really, before you go along the journey, you need to kind of look at your organization holistically, really understand the technology you're using first, right? And focus on building that right foundation. Because if you don't have the right foundation, it's going to be very difficult to kind of build and add innovation into your organization. And that's really where like the advisory services come into play, being able to kind of, have someone independent come in with a clean lens and really look at everything independently and say, hey, like, this is the view of your organization today, right? What's your thoughts? And begin to kind of come up with a roadmap around how to modernize some of that infrastructure collectively. So.
Great. Thank you for that. Moving on to the next pillar, let's talk about digital transformation services.
Sure. So, system integration's an interesting one. I was reading an article, I think on Monday, where in the Wall Street Journal, they were talking about like platform integration and various tools. And one thing that came up is about, 35% of systems in enterprise organizations don't integrate. And when I saw that, I was like, wow, I was a little shocked at first. But then when I really thought about it, it kind of makes sense. When I engage now with clients and we're looking holistically at their platform, I'm surprised to see at how many systems actually don't integrate together, right? And oftentimes, like digital transformation can simply begin by just like improving integration across systems, right? Without even doing any kind of fancy work, you could really kind of create better straight through processing just by kind of improving integration. Next piece is your robotic process automation, right? And this gets into the next level of automation and sophistication around automation by really streamlining business processes and leveraging technology for tasks that used to be very challenging to use technology to do, right? So these manual tasks that people are doing, whether it be Excel entry, form entry into browsers, or entering data from one system to another, you can quickly automate those things now. There's a lot of great tools out there, and it could really kind of free up your people to focus on the key activities in the organization. And then look, there's custom application development, right? Where really kind of sitting down, understanding the problems that are trying to be solved and building a specific application that kind of goes after and really solves that, that issue. DevOps is another big area where as you become more of a kind of modern organization, you're going to be running things in a more kind of modern application development, engineering, infrastructure, and there really is a need to have some expertise in and around those technologies, right? So that you could have the right managed services to support all of this kind of great new infrastructure that you have running. And then lastly, there's kind of staff augmentation where like firms might already have some great development teams internally, and they're really just looking for help here or there with particular projects or whatever it might be. You could bring value to the organization by kind of adding some staff from your bench. So
awesome. Thank you. And lastly, we have data services. If you want to walk us through this last pillar.
Sure. So look, I mean, we talked about data being the new oil, right? There is so much information, passing through organizations. There's a lot of resources that are needed, not only to like keep that data flowing, right, but to ensure the quality of that data. So really data stewardship, making sure that you're maintaining a single source of truth, that that data is integrating properly across the platform, and that you're constantly managing that infrastructure to make sure it's kind of upgraded, that there are no vulnerabilities, that you're staying in compliance, right, that there are no risks kind of you're being exposed. So I think like when we look at managed data services, as an organization, we see that as the next evolution of MSP services, right? Really being able to help manage a client's kind of data infrastructure so that their team again can focus on the analytics of the data rather than making sure that the data is flowing correctly and that there's a single source of truth. Like being able to bring those services to the table really help with a client's ability to leverage that information further.
Awesome. Thanks, Rich. Moving on to the next topic, Gary, can you walk us through the process of driving data quality and some of the decisions needed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, the piece on the left here is really about what I talked about at the outset here is how do we drive enrollment and then utilization of these portals, right? Because just because you enroll somebody in a portal doesn't mean that their phone gets cut off or blocked when they try and call. So we're probably all guilty of enrolling in all kinds of different portals that we never use. We then go right back to the old way that we had always interfaced. So it's really about selling the convenience, we think, making it a very efficient and sticky experience for a patient to, get a question answered, place an order, reorder, check the status of an order. So we're constantly, to us, we're constantly measuring and holding ourselves accountable to what percentage of orders in a given period were placed through that means, and what are the number of new patients that we are driving into those channels. And if you look at those two pieces of information, it's going to tell you whether you're doing an effective job driving enrollment, and B, whether it's a decent experience, right? Because if you see enrollment numbers that are consistently strong but utilization is low, patients are going in, they're giving it a try, but they're not repeating it for whatever reason, because there's a design flaw, bug. It's not keeping pace with their digital experiences in other areas. I heard a guy, I sit on the board of a community bank, and I've stolen this and used it and reused it, many different times. It was at a banking conference where somebody said, your customers are not measuring you against their last best banking experience. They're measuring you more and more against their last best online experience. So de facto, that puts us into competition, with Amazon and other people who drive a really good digital customer experience. And we need to do the same and focus on, building and rebuilding and making sure that it meets the need. Otherwise, over time, you're going to see, enrollment might continue to go up as you add new patients, but adoption ultimately is going to trail off because it's just not meeting their needs and expectations. So I think constantly looking and relooking at the pathways into and through the digital pathways that you're building to make sure that your patients or customers are using them consistently over long periods of time is the key to long-term success with any digital transformation project.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary. Now, Rich, can you dive into the digital transformation process and share some tips on how to, best approach the implementation?
You're on mute, Rich.
Sorry. A lot of this feeds off of what Gary was, just talking about. Like if you look up top to the right, change management, right? How are you going to enable right? This business transformation, right? What is the kind of end user experience that you're targeting, right? I think that is oftentimes like the place where we start, right? Because if you understand that, you can work your way backwards through this kind of channel. Because in the end, we're really looking for that enablement, right? How can we gain that adoption, right? And keep that adoption? How can we keep improving that experience? How can we learn from what's working, what's not working, and continuously improve the platform? Long gone are other days where you kind of like set it and forget it, build it, publish an application, and just like people will use it. Like that's not the case anymore, right? So you really have to kind of focus on the end user experience, what you're delivering, right? But also then really focus on like maintaining good analytics around that, platform, right? But then we kind of go into, the other key kind of processes, right? Which are, the business alignment, which I talked about earlier, right? So then once you kind of understand what you want to build, where the experience is coming, you kind of align that with, the goals of the organization. You look at your kind of strategic roadmap, right? You define the technology architecture, right? Which is really key, right? Because if you really want to capture good analytics and good data, you need to have the right underlying technology. You need to be logging this information, you need to be storing it. You have the right underlying data components. Again, that's why it's very important to kind of look at what the end experience is going to be, because as you're defining these things along the process, it allows you to kind of enable that end result a lot better. The other piece is, I never like to boil the ocean, right? So we always recommend, and when working with our clients as well, is, we like to start small, right, with an impactful initiative and then build upon each other, right? Because, when you start out along this journey, you're going to have one view of things, but as you go along it, you're going to learn a lot, right? You're going to learn a lot about the organization, your technology, your consumers, your patients, and you're really going to need to adapt your platform, right, to account for that, right? So starting small and then being able to build upon it is always the best approach, right? The next piece, support services. This is one I like to highlight all the time. I think oftentimes people go out, they think about building these platforms, they focus on a great user experience, and they forget that there needs to be support for this platform going forward, right? That, your operating model on how you're going to manage this thing on an ongoing basis, how you're going to patch vulnerabilities, fix defects, process enhancements, do all of the things that's going to keep this platform up and running and keeping, the adoption strong. You really need to think through like what that is, like what services do you need? How does that impact your organization? Who's going to do what? All those types of things are very important through that digital transformation process. And then lastly, like we talked a lot about, enablement, but it's really, again, then, getting it out to the users, focusing on a good kind of, training methodology and a good adoption plan. I always like to say if the project took you, 6 months to do, it's going to take you to 3 months to get really good initial adoption, right? And then really you have to kind of continue that process on an ongoing basis, right? Once you learn how people are using it, you got to feed that back into the platform very quickly to keep fostering that adoption and improving that user experience.
All right. Thank you for that, Rich. And last but not least, let's talk about the future of digital transformation. Gary, do you want to walk us through what this looks like for the biotech industry?
Yeah, look, I think, our view is that the future of healthcare is value-based, cloud-connected care in the home. So, devices and that, I will share, the news from this morning that, Spiro Health was acquired by Adapt Health. So we're now part of a much larger organization that has a shared vision for how we deploy technology to better run the business on a day-to-day basis, but also to be a bigger part of the healthcare system at large. And so if you can get more, so at our core, sleep devices are cloud connected. So they sit next to the bed and then they're pushing data up to the cloud every morning on patient utilization. We think that there's a future landscape where there are far more cloud connected devices in the home: pulse oximetry, continuous glucose monitors, scales, blood pressure, the list goes on. So then you're creating these huge pools of patient data. If you take the top two things on the list here, apply some AI and machine learning against the data that's being ingested into the cloud, that these clinical touch points for these patients, you can actually interface and prevent emergent slash urgent visits by reading the data. The data tells you a story on their underlying health conditions in a way that you can't always get at through, say, an annual physical only. So that becomes sort of visionary, sort of strategic future for the healthcare sector at large, that we're much more closely connected to how our patients are performing and key points of their health. We think that the patient, the employee experience of working at an organization like ours can also get can be far improved here, and that gets to the RPA business, taking out more of the just pointing and clicking that they're forced to do as a function of their job today by deploying, RPA and like scripting tools. And that the next one there as well is sort of right in line. We think we can continue to really enhance and update the tools that our patients are using to schedule themselves, to order, to ask questions, and again, build out more of a data environment for them to interface with, such that they don't have to use the phone or the fax machine or email or chat. We think those are all viable ways to interface, but if we can just reduce the utilization of each, it'll drive a better patient experience. And then automation, communication ties sort of right in line there. So I think there's a very bright future for the healthcare industry at large to continue to transform itself, continue to adopt technology and tools to deliver, but not just a better patient experience, but better clinical outcomes, whereby we have a much deeper understanding of our patient's health and can interface on an as needed basis rather than an as scheduled basis.
Thanks. Rich, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, I mean, I think, one area where, I see some trends and a lot of value is similar to what Gary kind of talked about around preventative care, right? So wearables and, being able to kind of feed information up to the cloud to the point where you could share it with your doctor, right? And they could come in and they have their own dashboard every morning and they could see that, like, look, Rich's blood pressure has ticked up slightly over the last 30 days. It's not alarmingly high, but there's a trend there. Like maybe he needs to come in, right? I think the next generation of preventative medicine is really going to stem around that. And that's where a lot of these technologies come into play, right? You're going to need to be able to automate processes. You're going to need to be able to have, very kind of, secure devices, right? That meet a lot of the kind of like regulatory guidelines, but that also enable the patient, right, to have a better overall, health experience. And I think, over the next 3 years, there's going to be a lot of that, kind of rolling out. And that's really where I think a lot of this technology can come into play.
Awesome. So this concludes the presentation portion of our webinar, and we had a lot of great topics discussed here today. And at this time, I'd like to open the discussion up. If anybody in the audience has questions for either Rich or Gary, you can go ahead and submit the questions in the chat. And if you do think of something else that you'd like to ask after you sign off, our emails are on this slide here, so feel free to reach out to any of us. And again, we will be circulating the recording and the slides around this time tomorrow. So just give everyone a minute or two to kind of type in their questions. We did have one come in though, and it's just asking, I think it's just a clarification of what RPA is, which is robotic process automation. I don't think there's anything else needed from that. Another one, Rich, I think you can answer this one here. What does the costs look like and how do you really measure ROI around digital transformation?
That's a great question, right? And one I think, I hear a lot of. I think I'll start with the ROI question, then I could end, I think, a little bit with cost. But I look at when you look at kind of digital transformation and creating and improving kind of processes, you can look at it in kind of several different ways, right? What are the the processes that you're looking to automate, how much time you're actually saving, right? So there's a dollar value clearly associated with that. But what risk are you reducing as well, right? So anytime there's a manual process, there's always a higher level of risk that the quality of data might not be as good, the quality of data might not be there at all, like someone might be out and they weren't able to enter the information. So now the reporting and analytics are incomplete. And that's very tough to kind of measure, right? It's one of those, I think intangibles. The other piece is, when you automate a process, like what are you freeing up that person to do now? Right. So, what value are they adding to the organization? I think, further, you have to really look at those things when figuring out that kind of ROI. And there's values associated with those two, right? And I think when you want to kind of think about automating processes and transforming, the operations of your organization, you have to look at it in terms of those buckets, right? From a cost perspective, I think that, look, it varies, right? I think that it goes back to what I think it was talking about a little earlier, where, to really have an idea of cost and what small like automation and innovation is going to be, you really need to paint that kind of broader picture and then know what, slices you're going to go after first. So look, I've seen like automation projects like range from like $15,000 to like $250,000, right? It could range anywhere in those buckets, right? But really it comes down to like, what are you looking to do, the depth of the process itself and the depth of the work that you're going to be doing.
Awesome. Thanks, Rich. Gary, I think you can maybe talk a little bit about this. Rich, you could probably answer some too, but what would you say is the biggest obstacle for digital transformation adoption and its success?
Yeah, I think the some of it is some of the clunkiness of enrollment, and some of that ties back to PHI and HIPAA, and we don't have the same ability to do sort of a QR code enrollment potentially that you see in other markets. So it's just it's too many clicks, or it's requiring manual invitations for enrollment. I've just seen it doesn't it's not necessarily a user-friendly process in many cases, and I think we need to solve for that if we really want to be serious about further transformation and making these tools available, usable, and adopted by large pools of patients. But Rich, I'll throw to you as well on that one.
Sure. Well, I like to call this one like the trifecta, right? It's like, how do you build a platform that is highly usable, that is regulatory compliant, and that is kind of mobile rich, right? Like when you look at those three components, very hard to do, right? Especially in healthcare, financial services, and highly regulated industries, you have a lot of kind of challenges, around that, right? So I think you got to find a way to strike the best balance, right? The regulatory element is usually the one that you can't bend on. So something's going to give, right? The mobile experience may not be as rich as you want it to be, right? Like something in those other two are going to have to like sacrifice. And I think when you're looking at building out your platform, that's what you have to kind of think about, right? Like where are you going to make your sacrifices, and where will they have, if you have to give something up, where can it have the least amount of impact on the overall platform? I think that it's always a challenge, right? And I think until some things can change on the regulatory side, like that's going to continue to be an issue. So
great. We had another one come in. Smaller firms that want to dip their toe into digital technologies, what's a good entry-level project or initiative that can help startup become more next gen in their tech usage?
Rich, I'll let you answer. The one thing I would say there is the work that we did starting like 10 years ago with physically mapping. It was really a lean process improvement activity, and we physically mapped out our the steps of a number of our key processes, and that very quickly surfaced issues, right? And that very quickly introduces this concept of what can you use technology to solve for. So I would say it's very challenging to identify an entry point unless and until you really go through the rigorous work to define each step that you, and in healthcare, so often these are not choices, like you have to do this thing with this payer and this product code. Otherwise, there's no reimbursement after the fact. So I think it's, you got to really sort of understand how your business exists today and what steps are a part of your key processes as just really a foundational component of any digital transformation or process improvement activities. But Rich, you can probably give a better answer than that.
No, look, I think that was great. I mean, I would say that as a startup, you're in a great position, right? For a couple of reasons. One is, you know, you have it's easier now to kind of go in and map out a lot of your kind of business processes and identify like where you have, kind of gaps and where things can be automated, right? As you grow, what tends to happen is if you have a really bad process and you grow, you put more people at it and it becomes harder and harder to unwind. The second piece, the other advantage you have is change management, right? We talked about before, the bigger the organization, the harder it is to kind of roll out change and execute on new technology. When you're smaller, much easier to do, right? So I would really kind of start with kind of looking at the cloud first, right? If you're not leveraging, cloud technology, you need to kind of rethink that, especially if you're, a startup. It's regulatory compliant, it's secure if you partner with the right person and they know what they're doing. And that really kind of gives you a lot of the foundational elements you're going to need to then begin to, improve your business. A great example is, Office 365, right? Microsoft gives you Power Automate licensing, like out of the box, right? You could use that to automate a number of manual tasks throughout your organization, right? You're not going to get that if you're running like on-prem Microsoft Exchange or using some other email platform. So you need to kind of think about like what that foundation is, right? And really kind of make sure that you're aligning that technology with your kind of future growth. Again, startups are in a great position to do that, right? Your investment right now in technology hasn't probably been huge, right? So if you've gone in the wrong direction, like now is the time where you can begin to pivot a little bit in a much more cost-effective way.
All right. Thank you, Gary and Rich. That looks like it's all the time that we have for today. So if we didn't get to your question during the presentation, we will definitely follow up with you directly via email, or again, as stated before, our emails are on this slide if you have any questions post this webinar. So with that, I wanted to thank you all for joining us, and thank you again to MassBio for having us today. We hope you found the session valuable. And of course, I would love to say thank you to Rich and Gary for sharing your expertise with us today. And if you're looking to talk digital transformation further, please feel free to reach out to either of us. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Rich.